know, right? That'd be fun. We should have a theme song. Maybe we can just be us humming. That'll be perfect.
Hello, everyone. This is The Deal That Got Away. I'm Nicholas Thickett, and this is Meg Misiak. And here, we feature the best known names in sales, and we get vulnerable to go and tell you what most don't talk about, and that's those deals that got away that changed everything for us. And, of course, to build better pipelines and close more deals.
Each week, we also feature a real seller, a real scenario, and do some coaching live. A lot of us don't, I don't know about you, Nick, but I hear constantly from salespeople that the thing that they wish they had the most, is just a little support, a little feedback, and not just where is this deal at, accountability, but real coaching. So we have a really interesting deal. Today, it was a great prospect on the list, but it had to be disqualified really early after the first meeting because the seller could not get them to think beyond that small one-off use case. So she really wanted us to focus today on how to quantify the impact of doing nothing. But I also really want to challenge us, like, is that the right question? What are some of the other themes that could be coming up? We're going to tell you more about the deal in a minute, but we have an incredible guest coach this week who will be helping us work through the deal. This week, we have Richard Smith of Allego. I have been following Richard for years. I think, Nick, you have too. And I was really excited to have him on the show today because for me, Richard does an incredible balance of both strategy as well as humanity, which I know that is a really important theme for me. He knows how to implement very value-centric, strategic sales tactics, but in a way that's really compassionate to both buyers as well as sellers. So, Richard, can you give us a quick introduction? Tell us who you are and what you've been focusing on.
Well, you've just done my job for me, Megan. But no, thanks for inviting me on, yourself and Nick. It's really I love this whole concept, by the way, of breaking down deals, and it's kind of what I feel like I spend like 80% of my days doing anyway with my own team, is literally unpicking deals and analyzing things to the nth degree. And maybe that's part of the problem that we have as sales leaders and coaches. But excited to get into this today. So yeah, I'm in the year 15 of my sales career. One of these guys who went to university, did a degree that I despised, that I wasn't intelligent enough for, got a pretty average grade at the end of it all, which left me with no other choice but to go into sales, because what else do you do? But yeah, never looked back really. Started life as an SDR, and kind of co-founded my own company in the process. That got acquired. I'm lucky enough to be leading a team of passionate, coachable salespeople, and very passionate about the profession, and really interested about how sales is changing, how buying's changing, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck in today. So good to be here.
Question: what was your degree in? What did you study?
So I was one of these guys at school that I always thought I was quite good with computers, IT, and so I actually did a degree in computer science.
Wow.
What I didn't realize was that computer science at university was a few levels up to building spreadsheets and Microsoft Access databases. And I'll be giving away my age by saying Microsoft Access for those who know what that product is. It was just, I realized then I wasn't cut out to be a software developer, a programmer. It was not where my skill set was. Wow. And it was kind of when I was 1 year into a 3-year degree, I realized I was kind of in too deep. There was no kind of changing. I just sort of had to sort of stick it out. And but here we are.
You know what? I just heard a bigger calling. And as me and Meg argue all the time, Rich, this is the reason that you went into sales, because you realized that IT was about fixing problems that could have been solved if somebody would have prospected properly and not had to,
That's it.
Fight for it after and hire Meg.
You were incessant with prospecting. I get it. We get it. Prospecting is everything. Bringing on the right deals is everything. But one thing I also really heard from you, Richard, was, you know, when it comes to a really successful sales team, it's not only having coachable reps, but it's also having a sales leader like you who is willing to be vulnerable themselves and who really, has the time, energy, and effort to also dedicate to coaching, knowing that it's not just about holding reps accountable with deal reviews, but it's also about helping building their skills in a really and making vulnerability okay. So the entire point of the show today. So this show is called The Deal That Got Away. So tell us about one of your deals, the one that sticks in the back of your brain that you're like, oh, I could have done things so differently, and tell us what you learned.
Yeah, it's so funny when you asked me this question and preparing for this show is like the deal that got away. Like there's countless deals that I'm like, oh man, we didn't win that deal. That's annoying. But there's like a selection of deals that I find myself like a year later, I bump into the same prospect or whatever on a conference, and I'm like, you're definitely the one that got away. Like I've said that to prospects, literally those words before, and they kind of smile, and I think there's an element of, they kind of know what I'm saying, and so that's happened a few times. I thought like one that really sticks out is actually one that is not it's in fairly recent history. When I say that, it's like a deal that in the last 12 months, and kind of like I could go into so much depth here, but it was one of those where it felt like we'd executed everything to the letter of the law to perfection, right? It was, I met this guy at a conference. He was quite a very low-level sales manager, and so he was really excited about what we did. He was a great sponsor in the sense of he got other people involved in the process. We didn't have to do a lot of kind of like multi-threading, almost like a sign of a great sponsor is I think someone who almost does the multi-threading for you, takes you to people that will have a vested interest. We built a committee, we understood their problems. The prospect collectively shared all these pains and challenges. We were able to connect it to lost revenue, lost productivity. We were able to get them to share that it was undoubtedly, like they were sharing recent examples of where our product would have helped them save their own deals. So everything just felt like a really kind of like we're on the right track here. We've got the right people, and we've got to a level of authority. I wouldn't say we were at power, but we got to a level of authority where we had the person who kind of reported into power kind of saying like, okay, we're going to take you to power. Who was this person was the managing director of the UK, and we even spent a session where we had everybody that was going to be on that call with the UKMD, and we almost used that as a coaching session. We were coaching them about, right, we want you to do the selling for us in this session. Okay, so we almost kind of like prep them on, hey, yes, we can sit here as the sellers and we can walk through this business case, but it's going to sound so much more powerful when it comes from you guys. And so we came to the big day of the meeting. We were all on Zoom. The UKMD was there. The CFO was there. Our team collectively almost did the selling on our behalf. And it was so funny. I remember at the UKMD, the first words he said after his team had gone through this pitch was, I need to commend you guys. You're the first salespeople who've ever got my team selling your product to me, right? Which was kind of the objective, which was pretty cool, yeah. But
I was like, where's the but?
fast forward, they didn't end up buying from us. What I would say is the deal is not dead in the water. I don't think deals are ever really dead in the water to an extent, because if you really kind of build on that nurturing and keep on being seen as a valuable proposition to your prospects, and a problem that they don't want to solve today doesn't mean that they want to solve it down the line. And I guess the question you're probably going to ask me is, why do I think this got away? It's a good question. And I can't exactly say that I've got the perfect answer for this. And I think that says a lot. Like sometimes we don't have the answers, right? But what I feel I've learned from that deal is power is everything.
Yeah.
Getting to true power the person who can literally kill a deal. It doesn't matter what level of work and effort you've invested to get to that point, and it can sometimes be hours and hours and various meetings to get to that point. If you don't align with what power truly cares about, if you're not in the top 2 or 3 things that they care about, that they're thinking about, you're in trouble. And so I would come back to, like, if I was to rewind the clock back, I'd say, hey, whilst we're building this business case, you know, who is the person? Like, why is power? Why is your boss? Why would they care about these things? And if they truly care about these things, does it make sense to involve Amelia in the process rather than, you know, we waste their time? So there's other lessons that I've learned, but that deal really sticks out to me as, like, it felt like we'd done everything, you know, to the T. And when it truly counted, it got away. And it's what's interesting is the people that we were in our little buying committee still kind of share with us off the record how disappointed they are that we weren't able to move forward and such like. But there you go.
So honestly, I hear a few themes, and it's funny because one thing I hear that I see pretty often in sales is, you know, there's champions who, when we ask, we're like, we're trying to prepare them, we're trying to do all these things, but sometimes we forget that our champions aren't salespeople. Maybe yours are, but you know, we're salespeople. We know how hard sales is, but sometimes they genuinely don't know. Sometimes that, you know, when it comes to getting to true power, I love what you mentioned around, you know, not only prepping with people, but this actually shows how hard sales is. You did so many incredible things, right? You literally were prepping with them from the meeting. You were getting them to sell for you. But one of the challenges that I always have with champions is challenging them, you know, challenger sale, on what are the things that are going to go wrong here. You know? So for me, it's funny because a lot of people struggle with doing kind of reviewing the summary and reviewing the pitch with your champions, because they're like, I've already seen this a million times. Why do we have to go through this again?
Yeah.
And one question I always ask is, hey, so are there any corporate pet projects that we can map this to? And it's interesting to hear, like, a few of those indications are like, if they don't know, you're like, oh my God, I do not have the right person.
Yeah.
But I've also been caught with those deals where I'm like, I thought everything was good. I thought we were really mapping these things to what those executives care about. But sometimes there are blind spots. And sometimes you don't know. And sometimes the champion doesn't know, you don't know. Even when I always tell people, sit on the same side of the table with your champion. And the fact that they're telling you we're just as disappointed as you are shows that. But sometimes even when you're working with your champion, you both lose. So there's so many incredible themes in this story, but I really like that you have one that demonstrates. I think a lot of us, when we think about the deal that got away, it's those like, I cannot believe that I was that stupid, that I did not do this. But there's a lot of deals where you're like, Meg, like, I did everything right. I did everything you said, and it still doesn't happen. And you don't always have that clarity.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And there's always things that you could have done different and probably done better in deals, like every single time. But this is, I think, what we need to appreciate as salespeople and sales leaders is that we can't make people buy. We have to do everything in the art of the possible to get the process right, to align with buyers, to make sure that we're keeping things as tight as possible, to essentially increase the chances of that prospect moving forward with us. But ultimately, what we can't do is force people to sign contracts on things that they don't want to move forward with, and that's just the reality of sales. It's a bitter pill to swallow, and that's why, for I think some people, this profession isn't for them, because a lot of people think, hey, if I do these things, I do them right, I should have a positive outcome. Sales is not quite like that.
No, and it's interesting. I worked with Andy Paul to launch his a coaching program based on his book, So never split the difference. Sell without selling out. And we focus a lot on win rate. And it's interesting because it brings up the point that, like, even if you're an exceptional seller, your win rate is, it's not going to be 100%.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but I think a lot of times there is, Nick, I think even before the show started, we were talking about how, like, sometimes people treat sales like it's magic. One, sales is magic. It's incredible. But, you know, to your point, like, it seems like this thing that we can't control, we don't understand. It's this, like, mystical thing. But even when you get to a point like you, where you're doing all the right things, you're demonstrating all of those incredible strategies, you're collaborating, you're prepping, you're building champions who are so invested in winning with you. They're putting in the hours, you can still lose deals. And that's also okay. And sometimes there's not, like, there's perfection in sales doesn't exist. So there's also a lot that's still outside of our control.
Absolutely.
So
I also appreciate the human aspect that, like, when Rich and you were talking about it, you're talking about it in such a human way too, because sometimes, you know, we're fighting our buyers past demons. You know, if I went out on a limb and we hired the sales trainer and they bombed, I can't afford to go and look stupid in front of my boss again. They told me if that ever happened, you know, like, or, you know, I know that my team doesn't pay attention during trainings because there's too much pressure on them, but nobody's ever going to tell you that. Or, you know, if I handed this over to finance, they're going to tell me, yeah, so how long until we see something, you know,
right.
Yeah.
money. Like, there's always those elements, but I loved how you were just so human about it. And it's like, I know I did the best I could. I did what I thought was right. And sometimes, even with everything, that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
And to that point, I think that we were talking about even transparency in sales and how there's so much pressure on sales that a lot of times we feel like we need to make excuses. But I also love how when you have that really solid checklist, you're doing all the right things, you can have some compassion and you can say, I did all the right things here. You know, I don't have a lot of regrets. You know, there's always a few things that you could have done differently. But I think that for me is, like, the point that I try to get to. I was like, okay, I did as much as I can, and I'm definitely going to learn here. But there's some of those deals where, I don't know, for me, demystifying doesn't mean winning every deal, but it means feeling really confident that you did a lot of the right things.
Yeah.
And that's all you can do.
And I think if you know, the when you demonstrate great selling to your buyer, where you've got their trust to an extent, they appreciate the experience that you've given them, you know, become memorable, right? That same company may buy from you in 6 months' time and 12 months' time. Here, the people I sell to, and I'm not unique, but they don't stay long in their companies. They move around. They get new jobs in different companies. And, you know, we've seen so many examples where people were like, hey, we didn't buy from you last time, but really enjoyed the experience. And I would just say that to the audience who are watching is, you know, if you don't win the deal, at least feel like you were memorable to your prospect, that they're gonna you're gonna be someone that they're gonna re-engage with down the line, that they're gonna point people in your direction, and that's always a win for me.
Yeah, and that actually ties in with a theme with our deal today, because I hear a lot of, you know, salespeople today who they either win or they lose deals. And I think when we also that is a very short-sighted view of your sales career. For me, is about developing relationships, and just like normal relationships, you know, those can look very differently. But some of the people who the salespeople who are really winning in the long term are the ones that are developing those deals, those relationships that they bring with them from company to company. And one example that comes up is when a champion leaves the company and your salespeople freak out. And I'm like, okay, one, if we do this right, we can have two deals. Not only that we can, you know, reposition and refocus and hopefully we've multi-threaded effectively so we can help them navigate, okay, who's taking this on? What does that look like? How can we help support them? The company probably is, like, freaking out as well, but also, where's that champion going? How can we be like, hey, like, because also, I have found a lot of people, if they are starting a project before they're leaving the company, and I've done this before, like sometimes it's because they're trying to do a Hail Mary. You know, they're like, this process is so frustrating, it's so broken, we need to find a solution. So either for them, it's like, okay, this is my last chance at like changing something. And when they leave, they might be just as frustrated with the internal selling and process. They might be like, I'm going to this new company, and I this would be a really fun initiative to kick off with, you know? So I think there's definitely a theme that I'm seeing of stepping outside the immediate win or loss and really thinking, how can we help? And how can we build a relationship that without those salesy, self-centric objectives that especially are like very short-term thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, let's go ahead and dig into our deal. So as always, if y'all, in the comments, I want to hear, what you hear. What questions would you be thinking? What little things do you hear and you're like, ooh, we need to focus on that. Again, this deal is really focused on how do we actually take a client who's really focused on the short term and bring them into more of transparent of sale. What if, I've heard a lot of sales people right now who are getting a lot of asks for pilots, short-term contracts, one-off use cases. They don't want to commit to like a 2-year deal. That's a huge thing. They want to start small. So if you have someone who you're like, oh, I know our team focuses on that, go ahead and tag them, bring them into the show. But let's go through the deal details. So this week we have a deal that came inbound with a very specific use case. They had an upcoming project, so there was even time sensitivity, and they had all of the details built out, even goals that were aligned with where the seller's company can help. The client was using 2 technologies that the seller's company partners with. So they actually, there was a lot of opportunity to solve challenges besides just that primary one. But when she got into the discovery call, she had to disqualify the conversation really quickly because the client said explicitly that they were not interested in a long-term engagement. And the seller's company doesn't sell one-off use cases unless there's an opportunity for a larger, longer-term engagement. When we asked the seller, hey, like, what do you think you would have done differently? She admitted that she probably didn't do enough discovery. It was that first call was really about qualification or disqualification, because she was trying to be mindful of that person coming in wanting something that was really small and knowing that they wouldn't be able to work together to solve it or deliver it. So in terms of where she's at today, the project that the client was working on just ended. It was a campaign, but the seller has not been able to get next steps booked or, to re-engage them. The seller hasn't had a lot of time to outbound. So she's also been relying on her BDR to try to re-engage this account. She's tried focusing on engaging, higher level contacts like we mentioned, and also leveraging more like news-based, research-based outreach, but she hasn't been able to re-engage it. And when this seller asked, is there anything you specifically want coaching on? She was really trying to figure out, how do we quantify the cost of doing nothing? How do we get them to really understand that there is risk in not moving forward? But I'm curious, Nick and Richard, like, is that where you would start? Is that your assessment of the deal? Or, what do you think stands out on this deal? So yeah, let's have Rich start.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this situation. It kind of reminds me of when we founded Refract. It's my last company, and some of the folks that we used to sell to were sales trainers, right? And the whole idea was that they would sometimes come along to us and say, hey, I've just got a gig, right, to train and coach some sellers and really want to use your platform so I can listen to their calls, I can coach their calls. It's great, right? So, and what happened is we we sold loads of these deals, but what happened is that and back then we were kind of given like flexible contracts, and we let them sign up for like monthly rolling deals. And lo and behold, what used to happen is these trainers, they would kind of their kind of training coaching engagement would kind of end with their clients, and they would essentially have no more use for our product, and they became kind of like just churn fodder, quite frankly. And so it kind of reminded me a little bit of that, to the point where we started to try and like reposition, like, okay, we need to stop selling this as this just kind of like, hey, one-off use case. Hey, I've got a use for your product, but it's only going to be for the next sort of like 3 or 4 months. And then who knows beyond that point. And we needed to think, how can we reposition this like to align beyond this one-off use case? And so I share that as just like, I feel like I've got some experience of what this person's dealing with and the frustrations that would cause. The first question I kind of like came to is, were we with the right level of person here? Okay. So when I see words like, we've got an upcoming project. Okay. In my head, an upcoming project, a project is run by a project lead, right? Someone that's taking the lead in that project. They've been given a very specific, hey, we need to achieve X, Y, and Z on these timeframes, and it only needs to be done in that time. Now, obviously, I don't know too much about this business. I don't know too much about the prospect that we're selling to, but one of the questions that I would have is, hey, was this person a project lead? And so by nature of that, were they having almost very short-sighted vision as to why they needed this product? They need this product to align with this project. This project is only going on for so long before that person moves on to another project. And so the first question I would ask is, in this deal, whilst we're speaking, the person who came inbound to us, would this have had a better outcome if, and we could talk about how we would have done this, if we'd managed to get to someone maybe more senior, someone with more of a longer term vision of the business, who might see and understand that, yeah, we're doing this project, which is a short term thing, but this is actually part of a much bigger, longer term vision. Because any project, why does any company invest in a project? It's not to achieve results in 3 months' time. They're doing it because strategically it aligns with something that they're working on the business. But the key thing is it comes back to the deal that got away that I shared before, to align with the people of power who say, this is what we're working to over the next 2 years. This forms part of it. And it's your job as a salesperson to be able to align what you sell to that long-term vision. So my first takeaway, and I'll take a pause and let someone else come in, is maybe a question is, was one problem here is that we were maybe just stuck with the wrong level of person?
Yeah, I actually have a question for you, because Nick and I have talked about, I think it's just multi-threading is just such a buzzword right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree. And to be fair, it always has been a strategy, but I've just seen a lot more about multi-threading on LinkedIn these days. And I've heard a lot more people talk. Like, the most common thing that I hear from salespeople around it is, I know that I should be multi-threading, right? They know that it's a checkbox that they need to do. But when I see people trying to multi-thread, it's like having people try, like they don't know how to do it in a way that's not like, can I talk to your boss? So I'm curious, like, and Nick, you were a master at this. I want to get your perspective on this as well. I've been learning. Nick is like giving me a master class on this, but especially within a deal like this, where you have someone who, is really interested, how would you handle that?
Yeah, no, I love this question, and you're so right, Megan. Like, yeah, I've got a multi-thread. Like, need to get like 6 people involved in my deal as quick as possible, right? Like, what does it even mean? So, and you're right. Where I think people normally go wrong is, I just want to get to your boss is where I want to get to.
Yeah.
So for me, if I'm in this situation, and someone like, let's imagine I've got this project lead. Again, I'm making an assumption there. I might be wrong. They've came inbound and they say, hey, I'm working on this project and I need your product, and it's all going to be done in 3 months' time. One question that you can get to at least at the very least understand who those other people are is like, that's really interesting. What conversations have taken place in the business to to lead to figuring out that this is a project that even needs to happen. The question now, what conversations happened in the business that led to figuring out this project even needed to happen? Because what you may get back then is people will go back, like they'll almost go back in time, even though they may be like, here is, you need to go back in time when they're saying, oh, well, where this stemmed from was a conversation that our CMO was having with our whoever marketing director about this problem. Now, once you've got them talking about those other people, the source of the river, so to speak, is like, then it's your turn to say, that's really interesting. You can start to ask questions about, well, why do they care about those things? What do you think they are trying to achieve? So that one simple question can at the very least start to expose and share who are the people who are really driving this project. And then it makes it easier to ask those questions of like, would they feel out of joint if they weren't involved in these conversations? But I'll hand over to Nick to give his perspective as well.
That's so good. So good. And I'll even play on that because that was around what a point I was going to make is a lot of the time that's only in live conversations. So a lot of multi-threading is just bullshit spam that they just throw to everyone with no purpose. But a lot of the true multi-threading is actually just me and you talking. Once we leave, now everything's left up to interpretation. So my first question would be to ask, did you send it to everyone? Was it written down in a document in their words with everyone having access? And did everyone agree? That's the first thing I would want to know. Because if you didn't, we all get happy years. It happens to us all the time. And we also forget we're human. So they might have forgot the bigger purpose than that one piece. And then the other thing I'd like to hear from both of you is, what about process? Everybody buys tech, but to do what? Did they have a process attached to that technology? So are they going to live in it for that entire project? And so the reason that they were doing this pilot is that they wanted to see how it actually worked. And so they were putting their process in. Or did they have a bad experience in the past and they were locked into some useless project or useless product that didn't do what they thought it was going to do, and now they felt like stuck and handcuffed to it. And so now it's their new operational model that's how their finance lets them do things, is they have to go and prove that it works and that people are going to use it. Because if we look at, and you would know this better than anyone else, the utilization rate of most technology is below 10%. And even like think of our smartphones, how much of the potential of it do we actually use? 1%? So two things I'd want to know is asynchronous conversation. Did everybody actually agree, and was it written, put in front of them with a written confirmation? And last part is, why the small project? Test a process, or to go and validate that it actually works the way they said it was going to?
Yeah, and I'm really curious. So I know the seller just admitted that she didn't do enough discovery, and I think a question for me as well is just the pressure of salespeople today to disqualify quickly. I know about y'all, disqualifying quickly is critical, but there's a fine line between disqualification and actually growing a deal. And to your point, Nick, one thing that I see pretty often, it's almost how people are misusing BANT. You know, they're like, do you have budget? No. Is this a priority? No. And I really like Richard's approach because, you know, focusing on, for me, it's all about compassion. I think a lot of times we get frustrated with our champions if they are user level people or lower level people. People are like, I don't need to talk to you. I need to jump above you and 15 people ahead. And for me, it's also knowing that like there are entire systems dedicated to mapping OKRs across businesses. Why does that exist? Because people are not good at it. From my experience, a lot of times, you know, I sell to sales enablement folks. A lot of times that's kind of the level I'm brought in at. My goal, yes, is to get to the CRO, but the path is not for me to be like, okay, I need to jump above the enablement person's head. But my goal, Richard, very, very similarly, I get a lot of one-off projects. People are like, I want a training. And I'm like, no one wants training. They want what the outcome of training is. And so it's also enabling your champion to think in that mindset and also letting them know. Even one of the ways that I do that is to actually kind of joke with them. And I was like, hey, by the way, I've been in enablement before. I know that we both understand how important this training is. But one thing that I often see is that other people in the organization don't value it as much. I'm curious if there are any initiatives that we can kind of map this to help you get this done. And I think having that compassion and coming from a place of we both need to get internal buy-in. And so also helping them map it, not in a salesy way, but in a very transparent way can be really valuable.
Yeah. No, I love some of the things that have been shared. And again, it comes back to your example there, Megan. Hey, we're looking for training. Well, actually, that's not what they're really looking for. The reason that they're even asking for training is for a much deeper problem, right? And that's, again, buyers. There's that classic kind of surface level pain. I talk about this a lot. I feel like I'm going in a different direction here. Where, hey, we need training. I mean, that's not a problem. It's just something that they think they want, and it's actually getting much more below the surface to understand why that request is even come in the first place. But I want to swing back to something that Nick said that I think makes a really good point. Is understand why is this prospect asking for a short-term engagement. And you know what is amazing, the amount of times that like I get asked for pilots and trials and proof of concepts, and when you dig below the surface, what you hear often is like, we've been stung in the past. And I get it, right? I totally get it. When you hear that, right, these are people put their neck on the line for some, especially for, big investments, but with all the change management that comes into bringing in new products. And if they've had a bad experience in the past and they're going again, and they're like, this cannot fail this time, I get it, right? It's totally makes sense why they want to de-risk what they're looking to do. But it's like, you get it. You have to get on the level of your prospect to understand that. And it's like, and then it's working with the prospect. Okay, so tell me, where did it go wrong last time? And if we were going to do this again, like, what can I do? How can we work in partnership to reduce the chances of that happening? And guess what, guys? Like, right now, it's a tough economy and spend is being inspected like never before in my sales career. And sometimes we may have to stomach that tough pill to swallow, which is sometimes buyers just need your help a little bit more. And maybe the pilot is what's needed to unlock that longer term engagement. And to your point, Megan, do we disqualify out too quick and too hard? When actually, maybe now more than ever before, and this is where sales is changing, it's changing month to month, yeah, maybe right now, maybe if you get to the crux as to why they're asking for that, maybe the right thing to do is to start off small, is to start off with a lesser engagement, but put a plan in place of success to ramp it out beyond that. So yeah, both two things that you both said just like really resonated, and I thought things on my mind too.
So can I
And
go on? I want to just
yeah.
add just like really quick,
Mhm.
just from the two of you before we go any further. Would you re-engage and try to save it, or would you consider it dead?
That's a really good question. I'll let Megan go first.
So yeah, I think that there's a few things to think about. And I actually think it covers literally what I was about to just say is, Richard, like, you're so right. And Nick, what you mentioned around truly understanding what people's objections are. I think that when we try to fight them or disqualify them without any, like, sorry, we just don't do that, we break some trust there. Because one thing that I have been working on with one of my clients is understanding, like truly having compassion and understanding for people's objections. Because when he was talking about implementation, super similar to what you're talking about in processes, Nick, he was like, on our end, it's super easy. It just takes a couple of weeks. And I was like, dude, do you know all of the work, effort, risk, resources that are involved in implementing a solution? On the buyer's side, it is a nightmare, on top of their normal job. And I think that when we, handle objections in that way without understanding, we're just like, sorry, we're not a good fit. We don't do that. Without having that, like for me, I use like a yes and strategy for objection handling. It's an improv technique, right? But it starts with yes. It starts with like really understanding why they have those fears, and also truly understanding the risk involved, as you mentioned. So for me, I think that's probably how I would handle it. I do think that there's a good op here, but I think just trying to re-engage in the same way in terms of like, hey, do you want to talk again? Why would they want to talk to you if they feel like you're going to push them into something they're not interested in without understanding the risk, the resources, all of those things?
Yeah.
So for me, I would be focusing on actually showing that level of compassion and really like kind of falling on your sword a little bit, and instead of just trying to re-engage it and say, hey, are you ready for a long-term engagement yet? And they're like, no. And also now I don't really trust you that much because I think you're a pushy salesperson. And I know this person and they're not a pushy salesperson. But I think that it comes down to like, how can we really explore this and employ all of the things that we just talked about in terms of show them that, hey, we're looking to help you. Even for me, I think one of the ways that I would do this is to say, hey, I saw your campaign. It was really cool. I'm so glad that you were able to, get that launched. Um, Last time we spoke, I know that y'all, had very strict boundaries around not wanting a long-term engagement, and I completely understand. I know that when I talk to a lot of clients, these are the reasons. And I actually saw your campaign. And, even if you don't work with us, I did have a couple of ideas for how you could maybe, think about doing this. And I'm happy to explore that and just be a resource to you in the future if you want to geek out. And I think the level of objectivity is really important. But I know that there's also a lot of pressure on salespeople to focus on where the value is, to focus on people who are the right fit, who have an immediate need, and I just don't know if that's like necessarily always a reality. But what do y'all think? Would you re-engage? How would you re-engage? Or would you just be like, this is not a good fit?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because and again, I don't know this salesperson, but this is the danger of qualifying out too hard and too quickly. Is you may have kind of burned a bridge with that prospect. It feels harsh to say that out loud, but that's just the reality. And I guess from lessons learned, because whilst that company may not be a good fit, that person, people talk, they might go and say, hey, I tried to buy something off this company over there, and they didn't really have any interest, and they only wanted long-term engagement. And so that's why I just say, like, I know we get put under so much pressure, like always be qualifying, qualify out. I remember Kevin Dorsey used this one line that I absolutely loved, where he was like, qualification is, can they use your product? Discovery is, should they use your product? But he said, people spend the first 15 minutes of a discovery call doing the qualification piece. And it's like, how do you think your buyers feel if they've committed their time to a sales call in the first 15 minutes? You're just being qualified. Flip it so that you do the discovery. And even if you understand their needs, even if at the end of the call, when you do your qualification, you figure out they're not a good fit, at least the prospect has felt like they got something of value from the conversation, and that you're leaving on good terms. So that's always stuck with me as a really nice tip. Coming back to the question that was asked, is would you re-engage? How would you re-engage? I think for me, it really depends on, how much do you really want to do business with that company? Like, you might have to come. Megan used the phrase like fall on your sword. Kind of the phrase I was going to use, where you might have to say, listen, on reflection, when we spoke, I felt like I didn't do a good job of aligning with you. And on reflection, I've thought about this. I've talked about this deal. I use this phrase, talked about this deal internally with my manager, and on reflection, I feel like we were maybe a bit too quick to just come to one outcome. Appreciate we've missed the boat on this project, but would love to, if you're open to it, to just have a second opportunity. And again, using that vulnerability, kind of like throwing yourself under the bus a little bit, which I think can really, really help get some empathy from your buyer sometimes. But I think it really depends on how much do you want to get back in with that business, which just sounds like they do, because they're already, I'm trying to prospect back into that account. But yeah, I do feel like there is going to have to be an element of falling on the sword to just win the buyer back over.
Well said. Yeah,
go ahead.
It's that you're building that trust again, and I think that humble disclaimer is, I missed a step. I'm sorry. I know I got pushed to disqualify, and I realized I took that advice because I didn't take that next step that I should have, of saying, well, is it usability? And me mentally answered, is it a usability problem? Is it a profitability problem? So I think you absolutely re-engage. But what I'm hearing, and I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on this, is I would ask one simple question asynchronously. I wouldn't call. And I'd send a video so they can see the emotion that I'm being genuine. Is that I'm like, hey, I'm sorry. I realized that I skipped steps. And by skipping steps, I lacked the map that you needed to sell this internally, or even understand how it works going forward. And I would start there. And the reason why I say this is it's so funny with small companies, they know their break even. They know when they make money. Most salespeople have no clue how their company makes money and when. The most tech companies, their new business department is just a liability, because they stop as soon as the contract's signed and they don't go until it's profitable. So they don't actually secure that it's actually business. It's just debt, because they've spent all this money just to go and get started. And so us as sellers on the qualification, if we're asking qualification questions in discovery, we failed to show up. We didn't do our job before we started. We didn't prep. What you said was so brilliant, was how are you going to use this so that, if it costs $100, that within 6 months, we want to make sure that you're at least seeing $1 back, or, within a certain time period, that it's at least paying for itself. That's what we're trying to do, because what we've noticed is that people that don't want this for a long time, a lot of the time, they just don't know how to use it. And yeah, that's hard.
And one question that came up for me as we were talking through this is, I think a lot of reps are qualifying quickly, not just because they would love to build a relationship and to explore these things. But I think, especially Richard, as a VP of sales, how do you find that balance of trying to explore, but also really knowing you don't have control over, can we run a pilot? Can we do something smaller? I think, even transformative selling is a big buzzword. It's a big thing that all my clients tell me, I want to do transformative sales. But how do you actually get people to think beyond that, one use case? You covered a strategy, which I really loved, which is, again, making sure they're mapping to those broader goals. But any other tips there? And Nick, I know you're good at this too.
Yeah. I kind of come back to any project. In fact, it was like I was listening to a sales call last week, and the prospect on the call showed up and said, "Hey, we've got a project going on around content management." Okay, that was the phrase they used. Got a project going on content management. And my seller got the trouble they got to is that they got stuck there around this project around content management. It was like how do I get beyond that, right? How do I get to why this is a problem? And we talked about, we strategized, and it comes down to just asking the right questions. And in this case, we were dealing with a not the most junior of people, but by and large, they weren't senior. And what we talked about was it always comes back to, use the word project there. Tell us more about why that project came about. Who cares about that project outside of yourself? Why do they care about it? Hey, you can see that you've just joined the business 2 months ago. What was the problem you were brought in to solve? Like, I love asking that question in discovery when you see that someone's new to biz. What was the problem? What were you brought in to fix? Right? And it may sound like a quite misleading question, but the truth of the matter is, people are generally brought in when they're hired, and as part of their interview process, they're getting set by the person that's hiring them. Hey, we've got these things that we'd love you to sort out. We've got these issues that we haven't done so well. And it's asking these questions that gets people to talk outside of the project, but talks about the bigger picture, what the business is striving for. And it comes down to asking the right questions. And when you get the answer to those questions, you can usually connect that to the people who truly care about those problems, the people who at a high level in the business, that connects with the big problems they're looking to solve, which connects with ultimately where the business is wanting to go. And I've just found that that's the key way to, go from this small project here to like big picture stuff. And sometimes little phrases like, hey, would love to hear more about this project. Just, if we may, just take a couple of steps back for a moment, just so I understand like the importance of this project. What conversations took place in the business that led to this even being a thing? And it's just nice questions that you can ask there in your discovery calls. Just get outside the weeds of the project. Hey, do you do this? Can it do that? And you get to more bigger picture stuff.
Yeah, and what I'm also hearing, and you mentioned this before as well, but I'm like, "Ugh, Nick always wins this argument." Nick and I constantly argue about if selling is easier. I'm a mid-funnel specialist, discovery through negotiation, and I'm always like, discovery is the entire point. But if you're not talking to the right people, if you're not talking to the right accounts,
Yeah,
then it's not going to work. No matter what you do, no matter how much you try to change their mind. I think so many salespeople are trying to change their mind, change the conversation, when it really is usually changing the person, changing the context, changing maybe even sometimes the line of a business isn't the right one, going in. You're not focusing on the right area of the business. So, even from this perspective, I know the seller has been focused on trying to gain access to higher level stakeholders. That still sounds a little buzzy to me, right? But for me, even, I think a good strategy could be like congratulating them on the fact that they actually are doing something in this area, that they're interested. Hey, saw you had a recent campaign that incorporated some of these things. Really, really cool. I talked to the team a little bit, and I was really excited to hear about some of the initiatives. And for me also, so I think it's like kind of a little sandwich here, a value of like taking all of that lower level knowledge and insight that you gained during that discovery call, but also pairing it with the top down strategies of public companies, like,
yeah,
knowing what their initiatives are at a higher level and trying to hypothesize how those two things connect. How
yes,
can you actually tell? I think a lot of times when people disqualify, they're like, that was a total waste of time. I learned nothing. And sorry, a little tangent. A lot of times when I start with account research, um, I did this exercise where I gave everyone like all of my BDRs brought them into groups, 4 or 5 groups, and I gave them the same account to research and form hypotheses on. And it was wild to see the differences. I was kind of cheating because I gave them an account that actually was a subsidiary of a company, a client of ours, a huge client of ours. Only one group found that information because they didn't start with Salesforce and realize that there was a past opportunity. This is connected to a current client. And so leveraging that information, that insight, using past conversations as a stepping stone and being like, wow, we learned so much. The fact that they're already doing an initiative, you can see that as a loss. Oh, I didn't, they only wanted to do this. Or you can see as a huge opportunity. To your point, if you can find who actually pushed that initiative, how can you find someone who's going to be like, yeah, I told them to do that.
Yeah.
Because honestly, for me, qualification, sometimes when it is a yes or no is when there are definitely some warning signs when I'm like, this person is only project centric and they don't know why this initiative. They're like, I don't know, we were just told to do it. And I'm like, okay, actually, this is not the right. Like, person is probably not even super helpful.
Yeah.
I'm gonna build a relationship with them, but I definitely need to get someone else because it doesn't sound like they can even connect me.
Yeah.
But using all of that insight and really celebrating, I saw that you're doing this already, and it's incredible. I got a lot of context there, but I also saw from a high level that you're really focused. This seems like a bigger initiative, and having one of those like impact questions to really focus on like gaining access with the information that you had.
Do your research is what I take from everything you said there. It can a little bit of time, just spending time finding out stuff about the company, finding out about past interactions. That stuff can help you in your deals. And so many people jump into sales call to sales call with like 1 minute research. Hey, I'm just going to go on the person's LinkedIn profile and see, do they look like a friendly person? That's their research. And it's everything that you said there. It's amazing what you can find that can help direct your conversation when you get on the phone with them.
Yeah, but Nick, you are the master of prospecting. So I'm curious how, like, final few minutes, like, how would you re-engage here?
So, going back to what you were just saying, Rich, I would have done research, but the first place I would go is I go talk to CS internally, and I'd say, what needs to happen for us to have a happy customer? So, when you have someone that sees value and they get excited and they dive in, what what is that? What are those 2 or 3 things? And I would go and I'd nerd out with CS on what attributes, what things, what mechanics, what pieces of the puzzle does that company absolutely have to have? And then I would also ask the other question of what can they absolutely not have that would blow this up? So there's your red flags that you're now qualifying for because you're qualifying on value, delivering what you promised. And then what I would do is there's this ugly truth about knowledge work is that most people don't know what a productive day looks like because they can't see what they did. So the other part is if that person's just working on a project, are they just working on a project because that's their job and that's how they're scored is just that project, but they always are just doing projects? Or how is that department scored? How is that go to market motion scored? How is that bigger picture scored? How is the person that's signing off on their paycheck? How is that all scored? Tie it back to money because all businesses are is investments. It's a money game. Show them how a little bit of money can go further because your product is a lever that has way more value when it's used for the right reasons. And as long as CS says the right reasons are in that company, be humble, go and say, hey, I was talking to CS and I realized that I missed a few things. And they said that if I have this, this, or this, that this is a big win for companies. I see you might have this. I don't want to make assumptions, but would that be worth us having a conversation over, even if it's just via email? Because all you're trying to do is just open it up to learning, right? And then kind of what somebody had said earlier is, what is their appetite for change? Is it at a department level? Is it a team level? Is it at a geography, a certain line of business? Or is this, like Meg, you said, is this transformative? Is the whole company trying to go and do this, but they know that if they take on too much, it's going to fall apart? So more of that puzzle that you can have ready on a piece of paper written down, the easier it'll be for you to go and re-engage.
Awesome. Well, I know we're just up on time. We're excited to see y'all next week. We will be back with a prospect. So the impossible prospects that you just cannot seem to get into. So we'll be launching that. But as always, if you want to reach out to us, Nick and I are actually, drum roll, we are launching a free training on how to win more of the right deals on September 19th. So we're excited to see you there, both, bringing in highly qualified deals that you can win. And then apparently the easy part is actually winning them. So focusing on the right activities, the right strategies, and honestly, a lot of the high level stuff that Richard talked about today, which if you're like, this is how I want to sell, I'm just like, how do you actually do that? we're going to be focusing on it. But Richard, if they want to connect with you, learn from you, how should they do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so would really encourage anybody to connect with me. And like all the stuff I post on LinkedIn is quite honestly this kind of stuff. It's the sales demo that I sat in yesterday. It's the deal that I'm working on with my rep, and I literally all I post almost every day is the stuff that I experienced in sales the day before. Quite frankly, so please connect.
So
love
good.
it. I know. I was like, I've been obsessed, and so I'm really excited for people to connect and learn.
Get me back on here again. I've loved this so much. I want to come for round 2 sometimes.
Well, I love when you hopped on and you're like, this is like, tell me about this idea. Like because it is, it's what we do in sales every day. But it's funny because as a sales leader who does coach a lot, you think everyone's doing this stuff. And you hear stories from salespeople and you're like, oh no, this is not how people are handling it. So I know I'm like, let's get you back on the show sometime soon. It'd be really fun. Also, we do prospecting every other week. So maybe we'll have you tap into those impossible prospects.
I'm down with that.
But also, if you know someone who should be on the show, if you want to hear from a specific trainer, but also if you want one of your deals or prospects covered, DM us. And as always, if you're like, wow, this was so valuable, tag a few people, let them know. These are really hard strategies, and we know that. So we hope to see you back next week and all the other weeks after that.
Take care. If you want, tag Richard and say that we should go and document prospecting together. We'll go and prospect an account for Lego.
Oh, so much fun.
Just go comment. Thanks, everyone. Bye.